Hello ladies, I'm honored that you came to hear Homemaking Radio while you get something done at home. And for those of you who are new here, I'm Mrs. Sherman, and I would like you to listen to these videos over on my blog where there's less distraction and it's got a better atmosphere, and you can see what else is going on. Look down my blog roll, meet some of my friends. And before you go to get something done, I would like to show you my teacup today, and this is one of the ones that came from Home Goods quite a while ago, and it's by Pacifica Home, and it has an unusual shape, doesn't it? A square with a little areas on it, and so, but I like the art on it. It's very, very pretty, like old-fashioned rose, climbing rose. And today I want to talk to you quite a bit about homemaking and how important it is to get dressed for it, because it is the most important job. And when you go to a public place and you want to be your customer, you expect that the area that you're walking into will have to be clean, and there are regulations for that. You know, businesses can be shut down if they're not clean and orderly. And so think of your home also as an important business, and just be a little scared, because sometimes we live in such a mess that if it were a business, we would be shut down. So we want to be as careful as we can about that, and if it's good enough for businesses, it's good enough for us. And that's why I say get dressed for it, because that helps. Now, putting an apron on over whatever you're wearing somehow can give some ladies a feeling of business, and of I mean business sort of thing. So I do have a clean apron every day. You can order aprons online. I sew a lot, but aprons just aren't one of my favorite things to sew. And so I appreciate it when someone makes me one, or if I can buy one. That seems silly, doesn't it, when I can sew one? But I really appreciate being able to buy one. And because there are some things I would rather sew and some things rather not. And so today, if you are not dressed, I would encourage you to do that. And whatever you choose to wear, just make sure that it's cheerful, that it makes you happy. And you've probably seen me in a lot of dresses, but I sew, and I'm trying to use up my fabric, and I like to try different patterns. And of course, if you choose to wear something besides a dress, that's fine with me, because the whole purpose of this is to do your best and to get your home the way that you would like to have it. And one thing that I've enjoyed about homemaking is the ability to put my own ideas and atmosphere into the home without having to pass it through a bunch of office people who are sharing the work, and it's all my decision, and I can really go with whatever I think of to make the rooms the way that I want them. You know, what do I want it to feel like when I walk in the door? Walk in your front door and imagine yourself as a visitor. And what do you see? You see it with different eyes. There are things there that you might walk past. You're so used to seeing it, maybe a pile of junk somewhere, and you're so used to seeing it you don't see it anymore. And it's the same with all the other rooms, the bathroom and the kitchen. You might not see it the same way you would if you were looking at it with a more critical eye or as a visitor. Now, ladies, I hope that you will go and get some things done. If you've got anything to fold, if you've got anything to put away, anything to clean out. I often find the kitchen to be the hardest and the longest period of time I have to spend in any kind of job. But I do have other things that need to be done. And I find that listening to something is very helpful. And when I'm getting ready in the morning and I'm doing my hair and I'm doing my skincare, I like to listen to nature sounds. Now, I live out in the farm, and of course I miss the ocean, so I like to listen to ocean sounds, or I like to listen to a waterfall or a lake. And they're all over YouTube now. These have just become the biggest thing, is that people are listening to, and I try to include these for you on my blog after the video, because a lot of people are going to these things just for the calmness and the peace that they need, and also because some people are finding it more difficult to get out and around, and to go on a trip is a very difficult thing for some people too. And so Listening to the nature sounds is very nice, and I particularly like to choose the videos that do not have advertisements in the front, in the beginning, so that you don't have to wade through that or click them off. And so, ladies, so today I would like to share with you a very important statement, and it's just something I made up, and that is to show your beliefs, show your religious beliefs or your faith by the way you keep your house and live your daily life at home, by the way that you talk to people at home, by the way that you take care of yourself. Show your religious beliefs that way. You know, most people are not really interested so much in what we say. They like to see what we are doing. They like to see what kind of people we are, and they like to hear our conversation, sure, and our attitudes. They'll notice those more than anything. And I remember one time I made a friend with a lady who did not have very many good influences in her life, and she was interested in us becoming friends, and we became really good friends, and we discussed all kinds of exciting things, and we were both homeschoolers too, so we were discussing books for boys and books for girls and all the exciting things that we saw in them. And after getting to know her for a while, she said, "Could you stay a little longer today and tell me about your religion?" But it took a long time, and I was interested in that because, you know, if you show your ways, if you show your life by show your beliefs by your life, you have a greater chance of getting anybody more interested in spiritual things. So I wanted to discuss that because something came up in Ecclesiastes. Yes, we were discussing this in one of our ladies' Bible classes, Ecclesiastes 7:16, and it said, I'll just tell you what I remember it said. I don't have my verses out right now. It said, "Don't be religious overmuch. Why do you want to ruin yourself?" And so I read other scriptures that were related to that and discovered that what it was saying, now this is an old-fashioned word, it said, "Don't be so singular." And I used to, I didn't know that there was another meaning of that word singular. So I looked it up and started exploring. It's not in use as much with this one meaning, and it means noticeable. Why be so noticeable? And it in other descriptions of the word singular, and it said here, "Don't be religious overmuch. Why do you want to ruin yourself?" And what it meant in the original language was to not be so fanatical, not be so singular, in other words, noticeable. Not, you know, sometimes in Congress you'll hear people say, "This party is remarkably singular in this thing that they neglect," and it just meant noticeable. So why do not be religious overmuch? Why do you want to ruin yourself? And then some of the original language said, "Do not be righteous overmuch. Why do you want to ruin yourself?" And so what it was a warning. With all this talk and all this fasting and all this praying and all this religious talk and trying to convert others and everything, that you could actually become noticed for being a fanatic rather than for the message. So I would say live the message. Live the message. And I want to read a little bit, I don't know if you're tired of this yet, but Up from Slavery by Booker T. Washington, because he had a problem with the students being very young, of course, being that way, because he had to remind them that it's nice if you have a head full of knowledge, but you also have to have a life that you live honestly and not be talking about everything all the time, but to be doing what's right. And so I'd say to the homemaker, in this era that we're living in, where people are more isolated and less able to get about, that it's easy to slip back into the end of the world talk, but that isn't going to get your dishes done. And that isn't going to motivate you, because well, even in the New Testament, when Christ was talking about, the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 A.D. coming up, and he was saying there will be some people who will be having a baby and some people who will be in the field plowing. And it just meant that they would be caught unawares. So, and that I also got the message from that we have to be found working. We have to be found doing what God told us to do. And remember that Black Day in Congress back in the, I believe, early 1800s, and there was an eclipse, I guess, something like an eclipse, and the sky darkened in the middle of the day, and all the Congress members wanted to go home because they thought it was the end of the world. And one of the speakers said, no, if the Lord is coming, he is going to find us doing our duty. He's going to be finding us working. So they stayed. And so it's easy to get caught up in the end of the world time talk, but that is not what we're told to do in the Bible. And you can read a lot of things about ways that we can improve our character, add to your faith virtue and to your virtue knowledge and that sort of thing. And homemaking can actually do that for you, because you start to be wiser in things once you start learning how to do things. And so I'm going to just encourage you to be happy at home and to do the things that it takes to make it a pleasant place. And don't worry about what's going on in the world and what's going on in politics, because it will never settle down. They'll always keep you in a constant state of upheaval if you pay attention to it. And I'm afraid that more people are dedicated to the news and what's going on than they really are to their own home, because in the back of their mind they're always worried about this stuff. And I heard that I've heard several women say that when they were younger, the world was in such an upheaval that they regret that their children never saw them happy and relaxed, because they were constantly worried about the end times, or worried about the nation, or worried about politics. And so if you can possibly put it aside, you'll be better off for it. And all of us are going to come out of the other side of this better people if we do it right. And I encouraged you a while back to keep a little journal and write down some things you need to learn and some skills you need to improve. And maybe you want to improve your character too. Maybe you have some personality habits that you'd like to correct. And maybe some of you would like to lose some weight. I personally have found some exercises and some cooking shows and some other types of things on YouTube that you're allowed to watch that don't cost very much or are free, where I can learn new skills, where I've even taken one on home improvement and the exercise especially. And if you're completely out of shape and you want to come out of the other side of this better, wouldn't it be wonderful if you spent this year and the next few months losing some weight? And some of these exercises are very helpful, even if they're just stretching exercises. Now, a lot of people have said that, well, my housekeeping is all I need. Let me tell you something. I used to believe that. And for years, I had a pain in this arm right in here in the joint, and I could only move it so far. And then it's the same with the hip. And then a joint, in my toes. And, I would rub salves and things like that on it that would relieve it. But it never changed anything. It just would relieve the discomfort. And I started taking some of the stretch classes for women over 50. Now, if you're very young and you're overweight and you're out of shape, I would recommend women over 50 for you, because they are not harsh exercises and they're not a bunch of jumping around, and you want to be careful. And so with just these stretching exercises, and I chose several different ones, I can't tell you exactly what all they are right now, but just some of the stretching exercises that I did every day since this whole thing has started in 2020, this, where people are feeling more limited and where they can go. Now, I personally can go and come whenever I want, and everything is open here, but I decided that I would go ahead and try to stay home and see what would happen, how I would feel. And I'm keeping a little diary about it. And I joined a couple of tutorial type YouTube exercise groups that were stretches. And they would have you do things just like move your neck this way or move your neck that way, or just hold your arm out like this and then lift it up like this. And I was just doing those. And I didn't always do them all, like they'd have 10 of one side, and I would do 2 at first and I'd watch it again the next day and work it up. And it's really interesting that after, since July the 7th, the pain in this arm has gone away, because I didn't realize that in homemaking you do everything from a certain position, and it's usually from the front. But when you're exercising, you're pulling things back and working out the kinks in your arm. And now I don't have to sleep on one side only to relieve the pain, because this is all worked out. And I thought over the years, I'm getting paralyzed on one side. The end is near. I better get things cleaned up around here. I don't have long. And so now I have worked out the kink on that. And then the same thing with the same side with the hip and with the joint in the foot. That seems to be gone. There's no more swelling, and it's amazing. You know, all the little muscles here and there are all related to where you hurt somewhere. And so I have worked all that out and lost a little, like a half an ounce. But you know what? It's something. And so we want to come out on the other side of this better people. Learn to make a tea station or a coffee station somewhere else in your house besides the kitchen, just to see what it would be like, just to see if it's more convenient. Sometimes I'm down in my sewing room and I just don't want to walk all the way back to the end of the hall and then get in Mr. S's way while he's trying to make his drink. So I created one in the sewing room and then one in the guest room, and I've gotten to get out all my kettles and all my teapots and things like that, and teacups, which were just stored away, and use them again. And so let's come out the other side better than we were before. I've decided I'd like to use up all my fabric. Is that possible? But so I've been sewing, and so you know, and you can have let's come out having a better garden. I watch a lot of gardening videos, and I like flower gardens as well as vegetable gardens. And let's come out being more sensitive to the sounds, the beautiful sounds of nature, and the voices of our little grandchildren and children, and let's come out somewhat more refined than when we went in, and surprise ourselves and surprise everybody else on how we can, you know, that's why I'm reading you things from the homeschool books. I'm homeschooling you. You're going to come out a wonderful, well-rounded person with good values and some real knowledge. As a matter of fact, I've been reading this book, Up from Slavery, and admiring this man so much because he used the word up instead of out. And we want to come up from this isolation, if you want to call it. Some of you more than others are more isolated. We're not so much here, but you want to come up from it, not out from it. Because you want to become, have better habits when you come out, and better attitudes, and better skills, and just be happier. And so I want to read a little bit out of this book for you. And I wanted to remind you that that was Ecclesiastes 7:16, where I said, don't be religious over much, where it said, don't be religious over much. Why do you want to ruin yourself? And what it meant, from looking up all the Hebrew words and the definitions, was don't try to be so noticeable or a fanatic. You know, you're going to lose your point if you try to be a fanatic, if you try to, and I think particularly it hits women sometimes, well, sometimes men too, because we want to do better. We always want to do better, and it could be from some kind of lacking in your life. You want to hurry up. We knew somebody once that Mr. S had taught the Bible to, but he wanted to go further. He wanted to do it better, and pretty soon he was going to be such a good Christian that nobody else was good enough for him, and he even thought he was better than anybody that had been in living a Christian life for 50 years, and he became very critical. And that's the one thing that religiosity can often trip us up in. It's interesting, you know, because Satan gets in there and twists it. And the Bible says to be moderate in your moderation, and it just means don't be extreme. And it doesn't mean that you can give up, that you have to give up deeply held beliefs, but you have to be careful to live your beliefs more than talk them, because isn't there a poem that talks about you're writing a gospel, a chapter each day, men see what you live, they hear what you say. And so I think it's important not to lose sight of love. And this is one of the problems with a lot of the child training books, that I don't like to read out of them, because I think that you're going to lose a lot of love between you and your children if you start in on these rules and these child training activities. And children want to bond with their parents, and you can't really homeschool the kids if they don't really love you, and you have to work hard at getting their heart back and getting your heart bound up with theirs. So today I want to read a little bit out of Up From Slavery, because this is Booker T. Washington, and somebody kindly told me to pronounce it Tuskegee, which is the institute that he established. And I'm so glad you told me that. Now, I have lived in the South, and I've never heard that word, and I never heard it pronounced until I was homeschooling and we got a hold of this book. So I have never been there. And what he was doing was he wanted to give he was born in slavery, and he wanted to give, and he was there when the emancipation was announced, and he wanted, in fact, the owner of the plantations, the man and his wife, invited all the slaves to come to the house. They called it the big house, and there was some official there that read it to them. And he wanted to bring them up beyond that, to help them find a life's work, to help them learn to have their own business perhaps, and do something on their own. And it was very difficult, because he was dealing with this was generations of people who had never known anything else except to be dependent on the people that they worked for a home. And so now they couldn't go back, and they couldn't, in fact, some of these farms were lost, and all a plantation is a farm. And in fact, I've been to a couple of plantation homes that were turned into museums, and I was surprised at how small they were. I guess I think it's just the architecture that fascinates people and makes it think it's just a grand house, but some of these people that owned them were just ordinary farmers, and they just used this wonderful architecture that was popular at the time, that made it look more like it was a rich castle. And they were farmers, so they were farmers, and the slaves were farmers too. So now they were going to go into a different kind of, it's kind of like us, you know, when the financial situation changes, or a company quits or goes bust, and then people that have spent years there have to train in something new. And so it was quite difficult. So he had all these students when he finally got a place to teach school, and he got some teachers. It was quite remarkable what he did. He had a lot of students that wanted to come, and some of them were over 40 years old. And I suppose they found out that in the world it was going to be very difficult. He said when they had read the Emancipation to them, that some of them at first were quite excited, but afterwards reality set in, and they thought, well, what shall we do? And they were even discussing it with the owners of the plantation, because the owners of the plantations didn't know what they were going to do either. Many of these farms were lost. So I want to read the section on some of the ordinary things that he had to do. In the early days, we had very few students who had been used to handling carpenter's tools, and the bedsteads made by the students then were very rough and very weak. Not infrequently, when I went into the students' room in the morning, I would find at least 2 bedsteads lying about on the floor. The problem of providing mattresses was a difficult one to solve. We finally mastered this, however, by getting some cheap cloth and sewing pieces of this together so as to make large bags. These bags were filled with the pine straw, or, as it is sometimes called, pine needles, which we secured from the forest nearby. I am glad to say that the industry of mattress making has grown steadily since then, and has been improved to such an extent that at the present time it is an important branch of the work which is taught systematically to a number of our girls, and that the mattresses that now come out of the mattress shop at Tuskegee are about as good as those bought in the average store. Some people in my family made mattresses too. All they did was just sew some ticking together or some other fabric and stuff it with something soft because they were maybe concerned about what was in mattresses and wanted to have something that was more healthful. So yes, it is, and it is quite a job. For some time after the opening of the boarding department, we had no chairs in the students' bedrooms or in the dining rooms. Instead of chairs, we used stools, which the students constructed by nailing together 3 pieces of rough board. As a rule, the furniture in the students' rooms during the early days of the school consisted of a bed, some stools, and sometimes a rough table made by the students. The plan of having the students make the furniture is still followed, but the number of pieces in a room has been increased, and the workmanship has so improved that little fault can be found in the articles now. One thing that I have always insisted upon at Tuskegee is that everywhere there should be absolute cleanliness. You know, I was reading this thinking, what a great message that is to the student that's reading this, and this should be required reading in all the public schools. I just want to go off on a tangent here, and that is that President Trump expressed dismay that and discussed that schools curriculum turned children against, indoctrinated children against their country, against their parents, and against Christianity. And so I can see there's going to be some changes now. There are going to be different curriculums to make sure that our children are going to be educated to keep America safe from some of these bad influences. And I believe that we could all make a list, and I could put it on my sidebar, of the new public school curriculum, and this would be one of them. And for literature, I would surely include some of the other things that I have been reading for various reasons. I know they like to include literature that is, they think it's deep, and they think it's, complicated, and things like, I don't even want to mention the names of some of these books because I'm sure there's some of you that think they were wonderful, but not for students. And especially young people who need to learn to have a bright, optimistic look at life. And I'll go off on another tangent. As when I was really young, let's just choose an age like 16 or maybe 12, that every morning, and I noticed this in my children too, every morning when they got up, life was brand new and they wanted to go outside and see what was happening. And they'd go out and just kind of have a look at the weather, check to see if they could hear the trees blowing, the breeze going through the trees, have a look at anything hopping around, or just, cars going by, anything, just something new. And we were so optimistic because we were allowed, now I was growing up, we were allowed to have a happy youth. Between the ages, I would say, of 13 and 16, our parents realized that we would have to have fellowship with other children, and that we would have to have a lot of leisure, and because we worked, but we worked at home, and we also were expected to do our chores. But they became more lenient as we got older because they were stricter when we were younger, and embedded in us some good judgment and self-restraint, so that when we got older and we were like 16, well, then it was encouraged. We were encouraged to have friends, encouraged to have them come over to our house, and encouraged to go on excursions with them. And in those days, we didn't pair up with people. A lot of people that came to visit us that were our friends also brought their sisters and brothers with them. And so we just enjoyed friendship, and we were encouraged to have friendship. And that was very helpful because, of course, later on, everybody ended up having to get jobs, or they got married and they had families, and it was hard work. So those precious years were very important to us as youth. So then he says, one thing that I have always insisted upon at Tuskegee is that everywhere there should be absolute cleanliness. You think about this when a child or a young student is reading this, how that would translate into his own life. He starts thinking about his cleanliness, his room, his car, his, and all of us thinking about our houses. Absolute cleanliness. Over and over again, the students were reminded in those first years and are reminded now. And I think that's one of the values of homeschooling is they can learn cleanliness from the time they get up, and they're not in any hurry. And I insisted my children not get up for alarms or anything like that. They slept until they'd had enough sleep. Now, if your children are home and they don't want to wake up in the morning, let me tell you, that will go into natural waking after a while. And they'll get enough sleep, and eventually their bodies will change, and they'll get up with the light, and they'll go to bed with the dark. That will change, so don't worry about that. Over and over again, the students were reminded in those first years, and are reminded now, that people would excuse us for our poverty, for our lack of comforts and conveniences, but they would not excuse us for dirt. And many of us who grew up on homesteads in Alaska in the olden days, that was one of the things that we instinctively knew. I don't know if our parents taught us that, but there was an instinct that said, yes, we had rough furniture. Many of us had stools that we sat on that were just logs, cut up logs at the dining room table. Yes, we knew we had rough furniture. We knew we had worn out old hand-me-down clothes. But cleanliness was such a great source of pride, and we would wash our clothes, hang them on the line, and then iron them. And some of us had to heat the iron to iron them, but this gave you so much dignity, and you felt like you were not as ignorant or looked at as ignorant if you had cleanliness, if that was in your life, and if you had good clean habits, if your house was clean, if your clothes were clean. He said people would excuse us for our poverty, for our lack of comforts and conveniences, but they would never excuse us for dirt. Another thing that has been insisted upon at the school in the use of the toothbrush is the use of the toothbrush. The gospel of the toothbrush, as General Armstrong used to call it, is a part of our creed at Tuskegee. No student is permitted to remain who does not keep and use a toothbrush. Several times in recent years, students have come to us who brought with them almost no other articles except a toothbrush. They had heard from the lips of older students about our insisting upon the use of this, and so, to make a good impression, they brought at least a toothbrush with them. I remember that one morning, not long ago, I went with the lady principal on her usual morning tour of inspection of the girls' rooms. We found one room that contained 3 girls who had recently arrived at the school. When I asked them if they had toothbrushes, one of the girls replied, pointing to a brush, Yes, sir, that is our brush. We brought it together yesterday." It did not take them long to learn a different lesson. He didn't allow them to use the same toothbrush. It has been interesting to note the effect that the use of the toothbrush has had in bringing about a higher degree of civilization among the students. Toothbrushes are so inexpensive now that I keep a package of brand new ones for company. So, in case they leave and they forget, so they get a new toothbrush and then they can just throw it away when they leave. And I keep other things like shampoo and soap, and it's theirs. So I always go to the Dollar Tree and just get all that stuff. It's not very much, and I enjoy having it for the convenience. With few exceptions, I have noticed that if we get a student to the point where, when the first or second toothbrush disappears, he of his own motion buys another, I have not been disappointed in the future of that individual. That's interesting. You replace something when it's worn out or lost or stolen, and you don't go around mourning and wasting time pointing a finger at someone, wasting time complaining or blaming. I've often said you cannot get anywhere in life if you're sitting around blaming, or if you are full of resentment, because it will just clog up your brain and you can't get started at anything. Or if you have a bad attitude, if you have a dreary attitude, or if you're an arguer. I was reading in the Bible during one of our ladies' Bible classes about the servant of God must not be argumentative, and how important that is, because people develop skills in arguing on how they can distract from the subject that's being discussed so that they won't have to face the subject, or they won't have to learn it. So they'll go off on a tangent and start arguing back. And I had to teach, when my children were young, I had to teach them how to avoid an argument, because if you say the opposite of someone, that's called contradicting. If you contradict someone, they're just going to argue back to prove their own point. So if you can possibly avoid contradicting, if it's not like a life-threatening situation, I think what they used to say is don't contradict or interrupt unless the house is on fire or something like that, you know. And how important it is not to be argumentative, because it is a total waste of time. It's like, I don't know if you've ever had a car that's stuck in the mud and the wheels just go round and round and round. They just dig themselves in deeper and deeper and deeper. And that's the way arguing is. And arguing just basically is contradicting. Contradicting is just saying the opposite, and also just because it's not particular reason doesn't really serve a purpose. It's just some people are in that habit. It could be they grew up in homes like that, and they think that's a way to make conversation, or that it makes them sound smart or interesting. And so it's just pointless. But when they lost a toothbrush, they would just go replace it. And he said that when they did that, he has not been disappointed in the future of that individual. Absolute cleanliness of the body has been insisted upon from the first. The students have been taught to bathe as regularly as to take their meals. This lesson, and you know, of course, they only got about one meal a day. This lesson we began teaching before we had anything in the shape of a bathhouse. Most of the students came from plantation districts, and often we had to teach them how to sleep at night. That is, whether between the two sheets after we got to the point where we could provide two sheets, or under both of them. Naturally, I found it difficult to teach them to sleep between two sheets when we were able to supply but one. The importance of the use of the pajamas received the same attention. For a long time, one of the most difficult tasks was to teach the students that all the buttons were to be kept on their clothes, and that there must be no torn places and no grease spots. This lesson, I am pleased to be able to say, has been so thoroughly learned and so faithfully handed down from year to year by one set of students to another that often at the present time, when the students march out of chapel in the evening and their dresses inspected, as it is every night, not one button is to be found missing. So I wanted to make sure that I had read that, and I'm getting near the end of the book, and I have skipped quite a bit. And he talked about the success of public speaking. That was very important to him, to teach public speaking and to be a public speaking. To teach public speaking and to be a public speaker. And somebody graciously sent the recording that was kept in a museum of Booker T. Washington speaking. What a well-spoken man. I would have thought that he was from a college in England. His speech was so precise, and he had very many good things to read. And I read some more of this to you the other day, and and I wish I could find all the other things that I need to read to you. And so I do want to go back and recap what I said about being religious overmuch and not ruining yourself, and what it really meant. It was not to be so fanatic that you become singular, which means noticeable in that. And I have known many women that got so caught up in religion that they failed to do what the religion told them to do. And keeping house is one of them, and loving your children is another. And so when you're teaching religion, you're actually teaching, especially Christianity, you're actually teaching people to love one another, and by doing that, you're teaching them to love God. And it's very dangerous, and I think it happens more maybe when you're very young, to get caught up in religion in such a respect that you start to think that no one is perfect enough to be around you, and they're all going to taint you, you know. And but we live in the world. We're not of the world, but we live in the world, and there's a reason for that, is that Christ wants us to be salt and light to people around us, so you can't cut them all off. I have neighbors, they're not interested in Christianity, they're not interested in our beliefs, but I keep an open door, and I keep friendliness going, and behave neighborly to them. And you know, if I bake something that I know they like, I'll take it over to them, and they like it, and they appreciate it. But they're not going to sit there and listen to you as much as they're going to watch you. So I think this is really important, and especially if you're very young. I think it's really important when you're very young, and that's why I don't call this an over 70 blog. I think it's really important when you're very young to make very good use of your youth. And there was the other scripture I read the other day from Ecclesiastes that said, remember your Creator in the days of your youth before the hard time come. And there's a whole description of things, you know, like your brain is going to get weak, and your jaw, your teeth are going to be weak, and there's this whole description afterwards. And remember your Creator in the days of your youth before the hard times come. And I think it's really important to make good use of your youth. And that's why we loved the homeschool books so much, because they inspired the children. They made them happy to be alive. They made them happy to learn. And one of the beauties of biographies and autobiographies is they gave the children a chance to see how life transpires, how it starts when you're young, and then you become older, and how you get married and have children, and all the work that you do. And so they can see where it's going, where it might go. And not exactly the same for everyone, but they get a vision of how life is supposed to go. And one of the advantages, for example, of watching this is a child in a large family, the youngest one, will watch all the older ones and know that he too is going to walk, and he too is going to be able to talk. And in fact, some of the younger ones learn faster than the older ones because they were listening to everyone around them. And so they get to watch the lives of other people. And so if you are, especially in these times, if you're isolated, get a hold of some autobiographies and biographies. And one of them I think that someone might enjoy is the one Jane Addams, who wrote, she was the wife of the second president of the United States. As a matter of fact, there's a picture of her somewhere, one of our old encyclopedias, I think, of her greeting a modern president. Like, I don't know, she lived a long time, and she lived through several, she lived until the time of the automobile, I believe, and the train, and I believe she was quite remarkable. There was a biography and an autobiography of her, Jane Addams, and I have quoted things from her several times throughout my talks here. But generally, these things should inspire you to improve yourself and make a better life at home. And we can easily let the world bring us down. But it's like this word up. I just love it. You don't want to listen to things. I've almost quit listening to what the latest thing is. I'll know when things have changed when I see them. They have changed. But I was quite encouraged by the fact that schools are now exposed, and they won't be very easily teaching children against their own country. And I will make a list of things that I believe that we ought to put in the school curriculum. And gratefully and thankfully, the Christian schools have preserved a lot of the history and a lot of the even the math. You know, you can corrupt. People would say, "Oh, math is math." It doesn't matter, but you can corrupt math too. And that was one reason why I appreciated the Christian homeschool books, which they use also in Christian schools, because these the way of doing things and the way of teaching and the way of learning and the information has been preserved. And so I'm going to make a list of all the things I think the public schools should teach. And if you're a public school teacher, you know, you can get these books and you can take them into your classroom and you can include them. They don't have to know the name of them or anything, but you can, while you're teaching, you can teach from your heart and say, and did you also know this? You know, just like you could teach them about the French Revolution. And as I have read to you out of one of the ABEC Old World History and Geography books. So ladies, I hope that you will get yourself a cup of tea and that you will sit down and make a list of things that you need to do today, things that you would like to do also. And I've got a lot of ideas, and there just won't be enough time in life to do all the stuff that I want to do, but I can always make an ambition to do that. I hope you will do that, and I hope you also do things that make you smile during the day. Walk around your house, look at something nice, change something around, and beautify it. And just, you know, try to be pleasant and to think on the upside. So ladies, I hope that you will do well today, and I will put on another one of those nature sounding videos for you, and show you a few other things that I'm doing. So God bless you. Goodbye. See you next time.